You are about to meet a royal Britain never wanted to explain out loud. Prince George, Duke of Kent, a prince with two lives. One life was official, uniform, duty, a glamorous marriage, 3 children, a wartime mission. The other life was whispered, nights that never ended, friends who could destroy your name, rumors that were not just scandal but a weapon. And then, in August 1942, he boards a RAF aircraft in heavy fog. 15 men take off, 14 die in fire, 1 survives. An inquiry happens behind closed doors. A short conclusion is read to Parliament, and the trail you expect to follow, the attachments, the detail, the raw record, never feels fully open. So the question is not only what happened in the fog, the question is why it feels like someone closed the book before we finished reading the page. Tonight, we open the file. August 25th, 1942. Scotland. A short Sunderland flying boat prepares to depart. Low cloud, poor visibility, mist that swallows hills. In that landscape, flying low is not a minor mistake. It's a death sentence. 15 men are on board. One of them is a prince, George, Duke of Kent. The aircraft lifts off, and soon after, everything collapses. Witnesses later describe it sounding low, too low, then impact, then a fireball. 14 dead, 1 survivor, Andrew Jack, the rear gunner. Ironically, a position often considered among the most dangerous. If this were a thriller, the survivor would hand you the truth. But real history does not work like that. Real history gives you a survivor with trauma, gaps, rumors, and a silence that only grows. Then comes the official handling, a private inquiry, a narrow summary, and then almost nothing. And that is where this case begins to feel wrong. Not because we can prove it was not an accident, but because it is handled like something that should not be allowed to echo. To understand why, you have to go back. George was born in 1902 at Sandringham, into a family ruled by one commandment: protect the image. The monarchy wasn't only a family, it was an institution built to project stability, control, purity. Anything that threatened that image didn't get explained. It got removed. George saw that early. His youngest brother, Prince John, had epilepsy and developmental difficulties. The court didn't choose openness, it chose silence and distance. The kind of silence that feels like a door slammed shut and the key thrown away. And George learned the lesson that colors everything that follows. The crown protects you, but only while you're not a risk. George was intelligent, charming, quick with languages, the kind of presence that could fill a room without speaking, but he did not fit effortlessly into the mold. His father wanted discipline, tradition, uniform. So at 13, George was pushed toward the Royal Navy like his brothers. For many boys, that is structure. For George, it felt like a cage. He wanted something else. Diplomacy, civil service, foreign affairs, work that used his mind, work that felt meaningful. But in that world, the phrase "we have always done it this way" was the hardest argument. So George did not explode. He pushed slowly, just enough resistance, just enough pressure, until he finally created space. And this is why he matters. He became one of the first modern royals to truly work inside government. Not ceremonial appearances, actual duties, reports, responsibility. He went even further. Factory inspector, imagine that. A prince walking into factories around machinery and workers, documenting what is unsafe, what is wrong, what could kill people. It does not sound glamorous, but for George, it was oxygen. Finally useful, finally real. And that's where the tragedy deepens. Because while his days were moving toward purpose, his nights were moving toward danger. London in the 1920s was electric. Jazz, clubs, champagne, a world where aristocrats and artists mixed, acting like the world had no consequences. George lived with his brother Edward, the Prince of Wales. 2 princes, a city that never sleeps. Too much access, too few boundaries. And George became a magnet, not only because he was royal, but because he felt alive in that scene. Charming, fast, effortless, but with that freedom came something else. Rumors. And let us be precise. Rumors are not proof, but rumors are a signal, especially in an era where certain private behavior was not just scandal. It was illegal. A brutal joke circulated for decades, claiming George would not be safe in a taxi with anyone of either sex. That is not a courtroom statement. That is gossip. But gossip is exactly how blackmail begins. And then a name appears again and again in the darkest retellings of his life. Kiki Preston. In some accounts, she is a glamorous social figure. In others, she is a destructive force with a smile. Her nickname was so infamous it sounds like a warning label, the girl with the silver syringe. Many biographies and retellings link George through that world to morphine and cocaine, and sometimes even heroin. To be clear, the most vivid details do not come from a neat official confession. They come from memoirs, biographers, and the smoke of elite circles that rarely put poison in writing. But the pattern is consistent. His private life veered into dangerous territory, and the court grew nervous. Because a prince who parties is embarrassing. A prince who becomes vulnerable through addiction is dangerous. Vulnerability becomes leverage. Leverage becomes blackmail. And blackmail is the one thing a monarchy cannot tolerate. That is why his brother Edward often appears in these stories as someone who intervened. Not gently, forcefully, like a man acting as doctor, guard, and detective, dragging his brother away from a world that could destroy him. And ask yourself a simple question. If they had to intervene back then, how much was already being controlled before the public could smell it? Now we reach the most toxic part of the file. George's love life. Persistent claims suggest George had relationships with women and with men. Today, that is tabloid fuel. Back then, it was illegal, dangerous, potentially ruinous for anyone near him. A prince might be protected, but his partners would not be. And this is where it stops being private. If it surfaced, it became political, a risk to the monarchy. That is why one story keeps returning, because it is so specific. The Paris retrieval story, the claim that compromising letters existed, and a small gold box with a personal inscription, and that people were sent to retrieve them before they could surface. Do we have a palace document you can request today proving it? No. But the story survives because it fits how institutions protect themselves. You do not debate evidence. You remove it. You silence it. You lock it away. And that logic is the spine of this entire case. George lived like he was free, but he lived inside a machine that only tolerates freedom when nobody sees it. Then comes the cruel twist. For a moment, he seems to stabilize. In 1934, he marries Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. The public scene is perfect. Westminster Abbey, glamour, hope, and many accounts describe genuine happiness. Children, a devoted father, a man who wants to be home, a man who finds comfort in small routines, tea, games, family, as if he finally found a version of himself that didn't need to run. And then the monarchy itself cracks open. Edward becomes king. Wallis Simpson, the abdication crisis. The family becomes a global scandal. Every royal is suddenly treated like a potential spark. And George, long viewed as risky, is briefly spoken about as a possible solution in the chaos. Absurd, considering how much fear surrounded his reputation. History takes another path. Albert becomes George VI. Edward leaves the country as the former king, and George is left with something dangerous, the loss of the brother he was closest to, and an institution now even more terrified of anything that doesn't fit. Then the war tightens its grip, and war gives George what he always wanted, a role that feels real. Service, purpose, uniform, missions. In 1942, with a newborn at home, he's sent toward Iceland to inspect bases, and we return to the fog. The aircraft lifts off. And then something happens that nobody has ever explained in a way that fully satisfies. The answer feels unexplained. Why fly so low over hazardous terrain? Why drift off route? Why end in fire with a crew described as experienced? The official answer is straightforward. Navigational error, poor visibility, low altitude, reduced power at impact, responsibility placed on the pilot. And honestly, wartime accidents were common. That could be enough. But then comes the second problem, not the crash, the handling. A private inquiry, a brief public summary, and the rest feels like it dissolves into mist. That creates a vacuum. When a prince carries a life full of risk, rumors, possible blackmail, and a past the palace would rather control, the stakes are different. He dies in fog. The inquiry is sealed. That vacuum pulls theories in. Sabotage, a secret passenger, a hidden mission, shadow negotiations, claims that he took the controls. Some theories are wild. Some are almost laughable. Most are not proven. But you do not need a grand conspiracy to recognize a smaller truth. Containment. The feeling that this story was not meant to remain open. And that leads to something else that still feels strange. George never received the heroic public myth you might expect. He was never made into a towering legend. No huge official biography that wraps it neatly. No monumental memorial machine. His memory stayed oddly quiet. And when you place that silence beside the risks that followed him, the drug rumors, the illegal love claims, the Paris episode, the fear of blackmail, the pattern makes sense. A hero is easy. A complicated man is dangerous. So the real question is not whether it was sabotage. The real question is why it still feels sealed. Not because we can prove murder, but because the mist around the records, the silence around his reputation, and the way his story was closed match an older pattern. Protect the image, close the door, let it fade. And yet it does not fade. Doesn't is the odd part. Because silence creates curiosity. Because people recognize when a story is taped shut too neatly. So what do you think? A tragic wartime accident or the most successful royal containment of a reputation in modern British history? If you want more royals, scandals, and buried files, subscribe to Crown Secrets. Behind every crown is a facade. And behind the facade are the records they hoped you would never open.